Welcome to the Lions for the Lamb weekly audio podcast. I am Jack, and I will be your host for this event. We hope that you enjoy this weekly message and that you may come to know Christ through the Word of God.
He can always be found. Don't you worry, not alone. No matter how lonely you feel at home. Life's too short to get caught up in little things. Don't you know this won't last long? This feeling you have that you're just not strong. 'Cause sometimes people just don't understand what you're going through. But his love surrounds, it's perfect and beautiful. So close your eyes, breathe it in through this crazy ride. It's so unexplainable.
I like this. Those of you who are here this week who weren't here last week, we're in the middle. I say the middle. We started last week, so we're still up at the beginning of a series. Our theme this semester is, man, even this is dim tonight, but that's okay. Our theme this semester is continued vintage college. What we did last week is we took the opportunity to kind of talk about vintage. So for those of you who are here for the first time, how many of you have noticed this fad or this trend that's going around? Everybody is doing things with vintage. They're decorating their game rooms vintage, and it's all about the old Coke machines and about getting the cool clocks on the wall and about the vintage furniture, and even the vintage clothing's coming back. Man, if I could pull off a tweed suit, I'd do it. Maybe one of these nights I'm going to go to Goodwill and I'm going to walk up in here in something that looks like my grandpa would wear it, but that's okay. Because if I could do it, I've got friends. I'm not one of those guys. I've got friends that they can pull off anything and everything. You give them something from the 1920s, and man, they look like they stepped out of GQ. You give me something from the 1920s, I don't know what magazine I would have stepped out, but I definitely wouldn't be in a magazine. So that's how it would happen. But we're doing a series called Vintage, and basically what we're doing is we're taking vintage topics, taking things that all of you tonight, our topic tonight, every single one of you in here will have heard it. But what we're doing is we're taking a new look at vintage topics. See, the Bible is a vintage book. Would anybody agree? The Bible's kind of old. Some people say the Bible's not relevant anymore because of how old and outdated it is. That's just not true. The things that are in the Bible that were relevant 2,000 years ago, they're still relevant today. And so what we're doing is pulling some of those vintage topics out, and we're bringing them here just to kind of put them back in our memory and kind of put a little twist on them to remind you that just because they're vintage, that doesn't take the value away from them. Does that make sense? Everybody good with that? So last week we talked about the importance of the vintage doctrine. Doctrine is important. Doctrine is important. How many of you would agree that you will be saved based on what you believe? Would anybody agree with that statement? Your salvation would be contingent based on what you believe. So it's important that you believe the right thing. Amen? Amen. So what we do is, as students, all of us are students, we've got to become students of the Word. We've got to become students of truth. We do whatever we can to dig into that Word, to get to know the author, and say, you know what, I got to know truth. I got to know what is right. And so we talked about the vintage doctrine, the apostolic doctrine, the pattern last week. If any of you want to go back and listen to it, it's on our website. You can go and get kind of caught up. But tonight we're going to visit a new subject, and I am really, really excited about this one. This is one that at the beginning of the semester, before we even started, I knew that tonight was going to happen. I knew that this was going to be something that I talked about because it's something that God's been working me over the summer, and I cannot wait to get here and share it with you. So tonight I'm just going to jump right in. We're going to just dive right in and see where this goes. So if you'll put my text up, Genesis chapter 50. We're going to do it from a very familiar story. Can you put the black screen? There we go. So I'll read it for you. You can just follow along. So shall ye say unto Joseph, Forgive, I pray thee, now the trespasses of thy brethren, and their sin. For they did unto thee evil, and now we pray thee, forgive the trespasses of the servants of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. Next verse. And his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we be thy servants. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? Next verse. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. And lastly, now therefore fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them, and he spake kindly unto them. How many of you were raised in church? How many of you went to Sunday school when you were young? So you heard the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors. Am I correct? Yeah. We're going to revisit that story tonight, and it's going to be kind of the premise of the subject that we talk tonight. I had the opportunity over the course of the summer to go to Branson. Anybody ever been to Branson? Pretty cool town, lots of stuff to do there, lots of these shows that you can go see, comedy acts and stuff. But they have this really cool theater that is totally dedicated to bringing Bible stories to life. And so we went, and somebody had bought us tickets and said, hey, we want to treat you to this show. And so the show happened to be the story of Joseph. And we got to go and we got to see this production, basically. It was Broadway production of the story of Joseph, and it brought it to life. And the whole premise was that the whole story of Joseph is a story of forgiveness. The whole life of Joseph builds up to a moment in climax. It goes to a climax where eventually he's put in a place to make a choice. Am I going to forgive or am I not going to forgive? So, let's do a little recap of the story of Joseph. Joseph was a dreamer. Do we have any dreamers in here? Do you like to dream big? I'm with you, Shane. I dream big, Caleb. Yeah, I'm all about big dreams. Don't give me these little dreams. I'm talking about like Mount Everest kind of things. If we're going to do it, we're going big or we're going home kind of stuff. So I'm all about big dreams. Well, Joseph was a big dreamer. God gave Joseph his dreams. And so most of you know the story. Joseph goes, and because of the dreams God had given him, he goes and he gets excited about them. I've done the same thing. Dreams God's given me, I get excited about them, and I want to go tell people. But it never seems like people are as interested in my dreams as I am. So this is Joseph. Joseph is the youngest of 11 sons at the time. Eventually he's the second youngest of 12, but at the time he's the youngest of 11. And so how many of you are older siblings? You have younger siblings. Okay? Now, this is just me. Y'all might be different. Y'all might be real loving and all this. But if my sister came to me and said, hey, Caleb, I had a dream. One day I'm going to be your boss. We got an issue. We got a problem that we got to talk about. Or the cliche thing of you've got the nerdy little freshman in high school who's really smart and he's gonna change the world and do all this, and you've got the high school quarterback who's a senior, and if that little freshman walked up to the quarterback and say, hey dude, one day I'm gonna be your boss, things aren't going to go real well. Well, this is exactly the situation that Joseph found himself in. Is he goes and he's excited about his dreams that God gave him, and he wants to go and share them. But he runs to his younger brother or his older brothers, and he runs to his father and his mother, and he says, "Guess what?" They're like, "What, Joseph? Guess what God showed me." Okay, well, what? You're going to bow to me. Like, Joseph say, what? Like, seriously? Like, you really mean that? You coming to tell me that one day I'm going to bow down to you? You got to be crazy. And so already, Joseph was the favorite son. Joseph was the son of Rachel, which if you know the story of Jacob, Jacob worked 7 years to marry this gorgeous girl named Rachel. Then the night of his wedding, after the wedding, he goes into his tent and he's ready to see his bride. He takes the veil off and it's her ugly sister Leah. He got gypped. The dude worked 7 years for an ugly sister. That's not cool. And so he goes and he works another 7 years for Rachel because he desperately that's true love. Any guy that's going to work 14 years for a girl, that's true love. And so they go through this whole story, and he has all these kids, and eventually Rachel is barren for a long time, but God eventually opens her womb, and she's able to give birth to a child, and the firstborn is Joseph. And so Joseph is already the promised child. We know that because his father obviously loved him because he gave him all the good clothes. All the other guys are wearing the hand-me-downs, and Reuben's wearing Simeon stuff, and Joseph's got this fancy little robe that looks like a rainbow. He's walking around, he's like strutting his stuff. I'm not going to strut my stuff here, actually. But he's walking around, and he's got, look at me. Look at what Dad gave me. I'm the promised kid. Joseph was a little cocky. If Joseph had one big flaw, it was that Joseph was a little cocky. See, I don't think Joseph was naive enough to think that when he went and told his brother his dream that they would really be excited about that. I think he wanted to go rub it in their face a little. So Joseph was a little bit cocky. You know the story. One day the brothers are off in another country and they're working in the fields and doing all this. And Jacob comes to Joseph and he says, I want you to go see your brothers. I want you to go check on them. I want you to go bring them some food. I want you to go make sure they're doing okay. And so Joseph's like, okay. So he starts off on this journey. And the brothers are working. And one of them spots Joseph walking up. And he thinks real fast. And he's like, hey, guys, come here. Come here. He gets the group in a huddle. And they're huddled around. And he says, okay, we got to talk fast. Joseph is almost here. But this is our chance. This is our chance. The guy looks at the oldest brother and he says, hey, dude, this is our chance. If we get him out of the way, then you can actually be the promised son. You don't have to worry about this munchkin over here anymore stealing all the blessing. Dad doesn't have to love him anymore if he's gone. And so they get to making this plan. And a couple of the brothers are like, I don't know, they don't want to kill him. And so they're going back and forth. And one of the brothers is like, well, let's don't kill him. Let's throw him in this pit. Let's throw him in the pit and let's just leave him to die. So then at least we didn't kill him. But he's still going to die one way or another. And one of the other brothers, they're looking and they throw him into the pit. And they're looking and they see the dust like of a caravan coming down the way. And one of the guys realizes, hey, that's an Egyptian caravan. They like slaves. Why don't we see if we can make some money off of this deal? And so they go and you know the story. They sell Joseph into slavery and he ends up in Potiphar's house. And he's doing well, and he eventually becomes the head of Potiphar's house. But then Potiphar's wife comes and she tries to seduce him. But Joseph, being the righteous man that he is, says, no, I'm not going to have any of that. Well, Potiphar's wife lies and goes to her husband and says, Joseph, he approached me and he came on to me and I couldn't get away and I couldn't resist. I did what I could, but it's Joseph's fault. Joseph gets thrown in prison. He spends 2 years in prison. He interprets these guys' dreams. How many remember the dreams? The butler and the baker. He goes and he interprets these guys' dreams, and it comes to pass just as Joseph said it would. He says, okay, hey, the guy that didn't die, whenever you get back to the palace, why don't you remember me and let people know that I'm down here? Did that happen? No. So once again, Joseph is in the prison. He's a just man. He's living right for God and doing everything he can for God, but he finds himself in a prison. He finds himself in a low place. He finds himself in a valley. Anybody ever been there? A low place of life, a slump place, a valley where you seem like it's like there's no hope. There's no way out of this. I feel like I'm doing everything I can to live for God, but why am I having to go through this junk? Doesn't make any sense. But Joseph finds himself in the prison, and before too long, the Pharaoh has a dream. And then the butler remembers, hey, I know a guy that can interpret a dream. I was supposed to tell you about him a long time ago, but now let me tell you, he's good. And they go and they pull Joseph out of the prison. They bring him to Pharaoh's house, and he interprets the dream. And eventually, he becomes the second in command of Egypt. He went from a pit to a prison to the palace. Joseph's story is a story that really mirrors a lot of our lives. It's an up and down roller coaster ride of life where it's at one point you're hitting a peak, and I'm the head of the household, and the next thing you know, you're in the prison. One point, you've got these great big dreams for God, and it's all going uphill, and next thing you know, I'm in the pit. And it's just this constant up and down and up and down, and it was all at the hands of his brother. It was all at the hands of his brothers who got jealous of the blessings that God wanted to give Joseph. You know how the story ends. There's a drought. There's a famine. It ends up that his brothers come, and there's this big old long ordeal where they go back and forth, and his brothers come, and they fall down at his feet and say, we need food. We're dying. And Joseph sends them back to get Benjamin, and then eventually to bring their father, and says that if you bring your whole family here, and I can see that your father is well, and see that your brother is well, then I'll give you some food. But eventually Joseph gets to a place where he says, you know what, I'm tired of wearing the mask. I'm tired of keeping up this facade. I'm tired of putting on a show for my brothers. It's time I let them know who I am. And here's the moment. Here's the climax that Joseph's life has been leading up to. In the moment, he faces the people that had caused his life to go from great to all of a sudden the lowest points that he ever would reach in his entire life. And he's facing them. And so what are you going to do, Joseph? Are you going to hold a grudge? You have a right to. Are you going to be bitter? You have a right to. Or are you going to forgive? Are you going to forgive? All of us in this room today have at one point in time or another, or maybe right now, you find yourself in a situation that is similar to the one that Joseph was in. People have wronged you. They have lied about you. They have cut down, belittled, and defamed you in the eyes of those who are around you. And the last thing that they deserve is your forgiveness. Anybody ever heard the song by Matthew West? That it's kind of new, but it's called Forgiveness. Is anybody? If you listen to K-Love, you had to have heard it. They play it like 14,000 times a day. So there's a good song, and Matthew West really writes about forgiveness real well. Because you see, forgiveness, while it's a vintage topic and while it's something that everybody knows about, it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to do. It's a complicated thing. But Matthew writes, and I love the lyrics to a song, and if I sang it, you all would leave, so I'm just going to read it. But he puts forgiveness in a beautiful way. He says, it's the hardest thing to give away. It's the last thing on your mind today. It always goes to those who don't deserve. Man, that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing. It's the opposite of how you feel when the pain they cause is just too real. It takes everything that you have to say the word forgiveness. It flies in the face of all your pride. It moves away the mad inside. It's always anger's own worst enemy. Even when the jury and the judge say you have a right to hold a grudge, it whispers in your ear and says, set it free. Forgiveness. And then the last one, it'll clear the bitterness away. It can even set a prisoner free. There is no end to what its power can do. So let it go and be amazed by what you see through eyes of grace. The prisoner that it really frees is you. Forgiveness. Beautiful words. Easier said than done, but beautiful words. So tonight, for just a couple minutes, and I don't think I will be long tonight. I really don't. We're going to talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness is a paradoxical thing. There's paradoxes in the Bible. There's things that don't make sense to us. It's like in order to be one way, it has to be another way. You know the verse that in order to gain life, you have to lose your life? How does that make sense? In order to be a master, you have to be a servant? That's a little backwards. The first shall be last? Okay. There's paradoxes in the Bible, and forgiveness is one of those things in the fact that in order for you to obtain forgiveness, it's something that you have to give away. In order for you to be forgiven, you have to forgive others. Let me prove it to you. Let's put up the first verse, Matthew chapter 6, verses 14 through 15. For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. Cool. But if you forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive you. I'd always kind of heard this, but it slapped me in the face the other day. Because I'm not a person that holds grudges. I'm not a person that's bitter and does all this. But I've got some people that I'm dealing with some anger with right now. And I'm like, okay, you wronged me, and I don't know that we're going to be okay with this. And it slapped me in the face the other day that literally the Word of God says that if you don't forgive, then I'm not forgiving you. If you're not willing to let go of your bitterness and your pride and your anger, then I'm not going to forgive you. That's a scary thought. I'd never thought about it that way. Put up the next verse. Mark chapter 11, verse 25. And when ye stand praying, forgive, if you have aught against any, that your Father also which is in heaven may forgive you. When you're praying, you got to forgive so that you can be forgiven. Last one. Actually, put up... Okay, well, we'll see it both. Let's read verse 38 first. Many of you have probably heard this verse before. Give, and it shall be given unto you, pressed down, shaken together, running over. Shall men give into your bosom, for with the same measure that you meet withal, it shall be measured to you again. How many of you have heard that before? How many of you have heard that in terms and in the context of money? A lot of times this verse is always taken out of context. A preacher will get up there and they'll take the offering. It'll be like, give and it's going to be given unto you, pressed down and shaken together and running over, whatever that means. Who really knows? I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. But a lot of times we take that verse out of context because we don't read verse 37. Verse 37 says, judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven. See, when Jesus was instructing his disciples, he wasn't saying, give all your money and that's what's going to be given back. He said, however much judgment you get, that's how much judgment's coming back your way. However much you condemn other people, that's how much condemnation's coming back at you. But however much you forgive, that's how much you'll be able to be forgiven. That's how much you'll be able to be forgiven. Give, and forgiveness will be given unto you, pressed down, shaken, running over. As much as you give it, it will be given back to you. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you and thereby be defiled. Do we have any biology majors? Any biology majors? Okay. How many have taken biology? You know a little bit about plants. You can just leave that verse up for me. You know a little bit about plants, right? Okay? The root system is very, very important to a plant, correct?
Yeah.
If a plant doesn't have roots, do you have a plant? No. No. Not only does the root system lay a foundation, it holds the tree, those trees that like their roots have been there for so long and they're pushing up concrete and doing all this other crazy stuff. Those roots are there to hold it in place, to create a firm foundation. But the other purpose of the root is to draw nutrients so that the tree can continue to grow. So this is an interesting root that the writer of Hebrews is addressing. He says, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. See, bitterness is not only the foundation of the evil that eventually leads to the destruction of many, but it is the source by which the nutrients that the plants of anger, of hatred, of disdain, continue to let that plant grow. If you continue to harbor bitterness, all it's doing is letting the plants of anger, of hatred, of disdain grow and grow and grow and grow. When you cut something down at the roots, you destroy the lifeline that is keeping it alive. Many people deal with the leafy part of the plant. Whenever we get angry or we see somebody else angry, we're quick to try and suppress that anger. We know it's not right to hate, so we try and suppress the hatred. But if you never deal with the root, it's just going to keep coming back. If you never deal with the root of it, some of you, maybe you've done gardening. My parents do it, so I know this, and it's just common sense. Whenever you go to weed your garden, if you just cut the weeds off and never pull the roots up, before long you're going to have weeds that are just growing back. It may not grow back and look exactly like the plant that was there before, but in some way, shape, or form, the bitterness that you have harbored will come back and it will manifest itself. Bitterness doesn't stop with you. What happens? How many of you have been hurt before? Everybody. What's the first thing we do as humans? I don't know about you. The first thing I do is I go and I run to somebody else so that I can get somebody to share my pain. Like, dude, or not dude, girl, female, person, dad, pastor, parent, friend. Guess what so-and-so did to me? Guess what so-and-so did to me, how they hurt me, how they put me down, how they cut me down. And I need you now to justify the feelings that I'm feeling. That's the first thing that we do. So all of a sudden, if you put the verse back up, the last part of that verse says, don't let the root of bitterness grow, lest many be defiled. Because before you know it, your bitterness has rubbed off on somebody else, and the things that you are spreading all of a sudden is defiling all the people that you are telling and that you are going to and saying, you know what, guess what this person did, and guess how they hurt me, and guess how they wronged me. And before you know it, you have not only defiled yourself, but you've defiled other people. The first thing you do when you've been hurt is go and find somebody who can share in your pain. You begin to tell them everything the other person did to you under the guise that you really just want their advice. Anybody ever done that? I've done that. I'm going to be honest with you. I've done that. When in reality, you're not looking for a solution, but rather you're looking for someone to justify the feelings that you so badly want to hold on to. This is how the root of bitterness defiles many. Real fast, and I'm getting close. Over the course of probably between the months of March and of June, anybody that knows me, I'm not an angry person. I'm not a bitter person. I'm not a negative person. Typically, I pride myself and do the very best that I can to not be a negative Nancy that's going around and doom and gloom and all this other stuff. That's just never been me. But between the months of March and about June this year, I noticed that something had begun to change in me. Something, all of a sudden, there were things in ministry opportunities. God's opening all these doors and stuff in my life. And I began to have a bad attitude. Anybody know anybody that has a bad attitude? Is just negative all the time? They're no fun to be around. Can't imagine what it was like being around me in these months. It had to be a little bit rough. But I began to get a bad attitude towards anything and everything, and I could not place my finger on it. I began to pray about it. I'm like, God, what's going on with me? Surely you should be able to tell me why I'm feeling angry and why I'm feeling bitter and why I'm doing all this and I'm lashing out at people. That's just not me. Help me fix it. And God began to deal with me about some unresolved bitterness issues. Some things that had happened 2 years ago. My family had been hurt. My family had been lied about. My family had been backstabbed. It wasn't even me that was hurt. It was the people that I loved and the people that I was closest to. But because of that, how many of you, if somebody hurts you, it's a whole lot easier to get over it than if they hurt somebody you love? If they hurt me, hey, hurt me. But don't mess with my family. Hurt me. Mess with me. I can take it. I'm strong. I'll get over it. But if you start messing with my family, we're going to have some issues. If you start messing, we're joking about it, but I'm serious. You start messing, my dad used to say, he said, you mess with my family, two things are going to happen. You're going to die and I'm going to be in jail. So he was joking, of course. Podcast, it was a joke. I just talked to a computer. So. But seriously, it's a whole lot easier to get over some things. My parents, the situation that they had dealt with and the hurt that they had experienced, they were over it. And I thought I was over it. I thought I had gotten beyond it, but 2 years later I found myself with some unresolved issues. And I had to go and I had to learn how to forgive. It was my first real experience with forgiveness. See, a lot of us say, yeah, I forgive you. Yeah, somebody says something bad and they come and apologize. Yeah, I forgive you. Yeah, no, forgiveness isn't just a word action, it's a spiritual thing. Forgiveness is a spiritual thing. It's something that is between you and God before it's between you and somebody else. What I learned, this is an interesting lesson, very interesting lesson. What God taught me about bitterness and about forgiveness is the fastest way to wipe away your bitterness and to begin to forgive people is to pray for your enemies. Everybody right now, think of somebody who's hurt you. We've all got it. Somebody who has wronged you. Somebody who has lied about you, who have backstabbed you. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe your family has hurt you. It's one thing to be hurt by somebody you're not close to, but it's a whole other thing. And it's a whole other barrel of monkeys whenever you're hurt by somebody that's really close to and that you love. It cuts. It's hard to get over. Somebody told me the other day something that their pastor had told them. That the pastor didn't even think anything about it. But years down the road, it left a scar in that person's spirit. And to this day, he's still working on it. He's over it, for the most part. But still, it cuts. If somebody that you love and that you trust all of a sudden turns and they do something to hurt you, it takes a little bit to forgive. But the fastest way is to begin to pray for your enemies. Here's what I did. Okay, I love Jesus. I really do. I love him with everything that's in me. But that doesn't mean that makes this stuff any easier. I'm still carnal and I'm still human. If somebody hurts me, I'm going to be honest. I'm the guy. Human nature says, you know what? I want justice to be served. I want them to be hurt. I want them to pay for what they did. Here's what happened. I'm sitting in my room one day and God's dealing with me about this bitterness stuff, and I'm reading the Word and doing all this, and he's saying, love your enemies, and I'm like, man, really? You're going to hit me with this? Love your enemies? Do good to those that hurt you? Really? Okay, God, you got your point across. And so what I began to do is I sat there and in my prayer time, I blocked out a chunk of my prayer time where I began to pray for my enemies. And I didn't just say, okay, God, I pray that you would do good things for them, and yeah. I didn't do that. It was hard at first. And I'm sitting there and I literally, as soon as I began to pray for them, I began to weep. I began to call them by name and I'd say, God, I pray right now that you would put the biggest blessings in their family that you could possibly do. Lord, I pray that you would bless their church. You would bless their finances. You would bless their ministry. You would bless everything. God, you would let them grow. You would let them be successful. Lord, I begin to pray the biggest prayers that I could possibly pray for those who had hurt me. And I sat there and at first I could feel it. It was like I was jumping over a mountain. I was jumping over. Everything inside of me said, you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this because prayer actually works. Prayer makes a difference. And if you begin to pray these things, they're going to happen. And so when I began to pray blessings over the families that had hurt my family, and I began to pray blessings over those who had hurt me, all of a sudden I found myself in the presence of God. God rushed in. And it was like the bitterness just began to melt away. I can't explain it. I absolutely can't explain it because it's a supernatural thing. It's a supernatural thing whenever you truly learn how to